From prison to palace, 7 ex-convicts who became heads of state. Since the birth of modern democracy, many people have sacrificed their freedom to change their country's story. However, only a few of them were able to rise to the position of commander-in-chief. In today's episode, we look at 7 ex-convicts who rose to become president of the republic. Number 7. Kim Dae-jung of South Korea. Kim was born in January 1924 in Haedo, an island off the South Korean coast. He started his career as a clerk at a Japanese shipping company, where he eventually rose to a managerial position. When war broke out with North Korea, Kim was captured and sentenced to be shot, but he managed to escape. 1 year after the war ended, he decided to get into politics. Kim was elected into the National Assembly in May 1961. 2 days later, Major General Park Chung-hee overthrew the democratic government, assumed dictatorial powers, and voided all elections. In 1963, Kim was again elected into the National Assembly. In 1967, he became the opposition party spokesman, and in 1971, he was chosen to represent the party in the presidential elections. Kim pulled huge crowds to his rallies and promised to end General Park's rule and restore democracy. General Park is said to have won the elections by rigging. Kim continued to seek both popular and international support to institute democracy in South Korea and end Park's rule. In 1980, Kim was arrested and sentenced to death on charges of inciting rebellion in connection with an uprising in Gwangju. After an appeal from Pope John Paul II and a U.S. government intervention, the sentence was reduced to 20 years in prison. He was later sent on exile to the U.S. Kim returned to South Korea in 1985. In 1995, he announced his return to politics, and 3 years later, he won the first democratically organized elections in South Korea and became its 8th president on February 25, 1998. Number 6. Patrice Lumumba of Congo. Born in July 1925 in Katako-Kombe, a village in the present-day Democratic Republic of Congo, Lumumba started his career as a beer salesman and later developed a keen interest in political liberalism. At a time when many African colonies were fighting for independence, he helped found the National Congolese movement and soon became the party's leader. Unlike his contemporaries, who relied on Belgian connections, Lumumba had more political autonomy. His main agenda included the independence of Congo, the Africanization of economic operations in Congo, then dominated by Belgium, and neutrality in foreign affairs. He had the most considerable following in the Congolese political scenery. In October 1959, Lumumba was arrested for masterminding an anti-colonial revolt in Stanleyville that left 30 people dead. He was sentenced to 69 months in prison, but released after 9 months due to social unrest threats from partisans. This happened just before the Independence Conference. On June 30, 1960, Congo gained its independence, and Lumumba was elected the first prime minister at the age of 34. He held the post only for 3 months and was ousted in a military coup and shot several times in the head. In 2002, the Belgian government apologized to the people of Congo and Lumumba's family for their role in Lumumba's death. Number 5. Dilma Rousseff of Brazil. Rousseff was born in December 1947 in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, to an upper-middle-class family. Her father was an immigrant lawyer from Bulgaria, and her mother was a Brazilian schoolteacher. In 1964, Rousseff attended the Central States High School, where students often protested against the dictatorial regime that seized power after the 1964 coup. In 1967, she joined the National Liberation Command, which advocated for change by armed struggle and orchestrated several robberies and kidnappings. Rousseff is believed to have masterminded the most spectacular and profitable operation of the movement, the theft of the governor of Sao Paulo's safe on June 18, 1969. The safe contained an estimated $2.5 million. On January 16, 1970, Rousseff was arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison, and her political career suspended for 18 years. When the two-party system ended in the early 1980s, Rousseff participated in creating the Democratic Labor Party and worked as a technical advisor for the party in the Legislative Assembly. She was appointed State Secretary for Energy in 1998, Minister of Energy in 2002, and Chief of Staff in 2005. In 2010, she launched a campaign as the official presidential candidate for the Labor Party. She created a coalition with 9 other smaller political parties, which gave her the momentum to surpass the winning center-right opposition bloc. in 2010, Dilma Rousseff was the first woman to be elected president of Brazil and was re-elected in 2014. Number 4. Indira Gandhi of India. Indira was born in November 1917 in Allahabad, India. Her father was the leader of the independence movement and was the first Prime Minister of India. After her studies at the Oxford University, she worked as her father's personal assistant, learning the art of diplomacy and making acquaintances with great leaders worldwide. In 1955, she joined the Congress Party Working Committee and was elected head of the party in 1959. When her father died in 1964, she was appointed to the upper house of the Indian Parliament. When her father's successor died 2 years later, she ascended to the position of Prime Minister. Indira's rule was characterized by authoritarian tendencies and massive corruption. In 1975, the Allahabad High Court found her guilty of electoral malpractice and misappropriation of public funds. Instead of resigning from office, she resorted to illegally arresting and sentencing most of her opponents. She had lost popularity and was defeated in the 1977 elections, immediately after which she went to jail on corruption charges. However, she was in jail only for a short time. The following year, she won elections to the lower house of parliament. She returned to power in 1980 as Prime Minister for the second time. Number 3. Fidel Castro of Cuba. Castro was born in August 1926 in Biran, Cuba. His father was a war veteran and migrant to Cuba from Galicia in northwestern Spain. His mother was a Canarian woman who worked as a domestic servant for Castro's father and later became his mistress and later his second wife. From the age of 6, Castro was sent to live with his teacher. At 19, he was enrolled at the University of Havana. Instead of studying law, Castro was deeply invested in student activism and violent gangsterism on campus. Castro became very critical of the corruption of the Cuban government. When he received death threats, he started carrying a gun and surrounding himself with a group of armed friends. At 21, Castro joined an expedition to overthrow Rafael Trujillo's government in the Dominican Republic. Upon his return, he assumed the leading role in all student protests in Havana. In July 1952, Castro formed a group called the Movement, which recruited revolutionary fighters from Havana's poorest districts. Within a year, he had over 1,200 followers. In July 1953, Castro gathered 165 of his revolutionaries and launched an attack on Moncada, a military barracks outside Santiago de Cuba. They met with fierce resistance. Castro's side suffered 6 dead and 15 wounded, while the army suffered 19 dead and 27 wounded. Castro was later arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, Cuban President Batista didn't see Castro as much of a threat. As such, he ordered his release after 2 years in jail, a very big mistake. Castro immediately traveled to Mexico, where he met Che Guevara, who ran a series of successful military campaigns, which eventually led to the fall of Batista's regime in 1959. José Miro Cardona became Prime Minister of Cuba, a post he held for only a month and resigned. Fidel Castro took over as Prime Minister at the age of 32. He was Prime Minister for 17 years and President for 32 years. Number 2. Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria. Obasanjo was born in March 1937 in Ifo Ogun, southwestern Nigeria. His parents were peasant farmers. Obasanjo was the first of 9 children, of which only 2 survived childhood. At the age of 19, Obasanjo enlisted in the Nigerian army and steadily progressed through the ranks, becoming a major within 7 years. Following a 1975 coup that ousted the dictatorial regime, the country was governed by a supreme military council, with General Murtala Muhammad as the council leader and Olusegun Obasanjo as second in command. In February 1976, General Murtala Muhammad was assassinated and Obasanjo became the chairman of the Supreme Military Council. In 1979, owing to popular demands, Nigeria returned to civilian rule. But before the dissolution of the military council, Obasanjo had promoted himself to the rank of general. 6 years later, another military dictator, Sani Abacha, seized power and abolished all democratic institutions. Obasanjo was an outspoken critic of the Abacha regime. In March 1995, Obasanjo was convicted for orchestrating a failed coup against Sani Abacha and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He spent the first 4 months chained up in solitary confinement in Ikoyi, then moved to the Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison in Lagos. He was released 3 years later after Abacha's sudden death in June 1998. Now a free man, and with Nigeria returning to civilian rule, Obasanjo immediately joined the People's Democratic Party, or PDP. A year later, during a PDP convention, he was selected to represent the party in the upcoming presidential elections, in which he won 63% of the votes. He was sworn in as president of Nigeria in May 1999 and re-elected for a second term in May 2003. Before we get to the top of our countdown list, please do not forget to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Number 1. Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Mandela was born in July 1918 in South Africa's Cape Province. In his early years, he was given the nickname Rolilala, meaning troublemaker. Still, he was later referred to by his clan name Madiba. In 1937, he attended a Methodist college in Fort Beaufort, where the schoolmasters emphasized the superiority of European culture. In contrast, Mandela was mainly interested in native African culture. In 1939, when he moved to the University of Fort Hare to study politics and native administration, there he made friends who had connections at the African National Congress, the ANC, which stood up for an independent South Africa from the British Empire. By the age of 23, he had become actively involved in the ANC movement. He was an executive member of the party's Youth League. In the South African general elections of 1948, in which only whites were allowed to vote, the Nationalist Party took power. In their effort to enforce racial segregation, they implemented the new apartheid legislation. On June 22, 1952, Mandela addressed a crowd of over 10,000 people to launch a non-violence campaign against apartheid. In response, the apartheid government introduced the 1953 Public Safety Act, banning public appearances by ANC members. Worse, they ordered the relocation of all black people from Sophiatown suburb to Johannesburg. ANC militants resorted to violence, bombing many government buildings and power stations. On June 12, 1964, Mandela and 2 other activists were convicted for planning guerrilla warfare against the government and sentenced to life in prison. They spent 18 years in the Robben Island prison and were transferred to Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town in 1982 and to Victor Verster Prison in 1988. However, the 1980s witnessed an escalation of free Mandela protests and violence all over the country. Also, economic depression was looming as many multinationals had stopped investing in South Africa on ethical grounds. As a result, the Nationalist Party's new leader held a cabinet meeting and pointed out that apartheid was no longer sustainable. He therefore proposed the immediate release of Mandela and other ANC detainees. After a series of deliberations and closed-door meetings, Mandela was released on February 11, 1990, after spending 27 years in prison. With the end of the apartheid, the first multiracial general elections were scheduled for April 1994. The ANC, represented by Mandela, won 63% of the votes. Mandela became South Africa's first black president on May 10, 1994. Thank you for watching, and do well to check out our next video right here.